Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Gilberto. I'm a developer advocate at Snowflake, and I'm very excited to have you join today's virtual hands-on lab. Today, I'll be covering Snowflake's native app framework, and here's the agenda that I'd like to walk through. First, we'll start off with an overview of the native app framework, and then we will dive into a hands-on lab where we actually get to play with the native app through a quick start on quickstarts.snowflake.com. So with that, let's get into it. So what is the Snowflake native app framework? With the native app framework, you can now build apps that use Snowflake functionalities. And the neat thing about this is that you can bring your tools and your preferred coding language to this entire process. I'll give you more details on that in a bit. You can now publish your native app on the Snowflake marketplace. So that can help with distributing the native app and also monetizing the native app. And then if you're a consumer who is browsing the Snowflake marketplace and you see a native app that you're interested in purchasing and installing, you can install it and run it directly in your Snowflake account. And so if you've created an app and you have published it on the Snowflake marketplace, you are an app provider. And again, by being able to publish it on Snowflake marketplace, you can monetize it, which means you can drive revenue. I mentioned earlier about building native apps that use Snowflake functionalities. This helps you build a lot faster because you're using Snowflake features and components that you're already very familiar with. And of course, deployment is much easier now. You don't have to worry about managing your own infrastructure. This is all happening on Snowflake. And as I mentioned, because this is all happening within Snowflake, the data is secure. And so this can help ease any kind of apprehensions that a customer or an end user may have about installing your native app in their account because the data is secure all within Snowflake's data perimeter, and this can help accelerate customer adoption. If you're a consumer, so someone who is browsing the Snowflake marketplace, you can check out all the native apps that are out there. You can purchase one and then run an application that could put a data set that is in your Snowflake account to use. And the apps run all in your account. You don't need to move or copy data anywhere. Again, this is all within Snowflake's secure data perimeter. So let's talk about a few app deployment models. I have three here, and the goal of this is to kind of give you a mental model of how Snowflake native app deployment models work compared to other managed and connected app deployment models, which you may be more familiar with. So the one that you are probably most familiar with is the managed app deployment model. This is where, let's say, a B2B SaaS app is essentially the owner of every single layer in the stack. So, from the user interface, the UI layer, the processing layer. So maybe the company or the app exposes an API that helps facilitate interactions from the UI and data that's in the persistent layer, right? And then the persistent layer representing the data store that SaaS app is using. In this case, the example shows Snowflake as that persistent layer. And then in the middle, you have the connected app deployment model. So this is actually very similar to the managed app model. The key difference here is that the persistent layer is owned by the consumer. So this is not something that is owned by the B2B SaaS app. A consumer essentially can bring their own backend, their own persistent layer, their own data store, and connect it to the UI and the processing layer of that app. So this is a connected app deployment model. And then on the right, now that you've seen how managed and the connected app deployment models, you can kind of easily grok how Snowflake native apps work because they all happen within Snowflake. So the UI is within Snowflake. The processing layer is within Snowflake. And of course, the persistence layer, the data is all stored in Snowflake as well. So this is Snowflake top to bottom. All right, let's talk about building a Snowflake native app from the app provider perspective. So I mentioned earlier about being able to bring your own tools and also programming, writing code, right, in your preferred programming language. You're going to be working and developing your app. You're going to be working with Snowflake primitives, so things that you are already very familiar with. You would be able to code and write against these primitives in your own preferred coding language. And then really neat thing about this is that this allows for local development of your native app, right? And also local testing. So you can play around with a lot of the development and testing locally versus, trying to find some workaround for this part of the app building process. Once you've decided that your app is in a good state and may be ready for consumption by a broader audience, you can publish it on the Snowflake marketplace as a private or a public listing. This is something that is currently in private preview, but we are hoping to be in public preview very soon. And then you can also attach a billing model to your app. And I mentioned earlier about being able to monetize and drive revenue through your native app. maybe you have a fixed billing model where that is set and doesn't change. Or maybe you have a billing model that is dependent on custom events. So maybe events that are happening or being emitted through your native app, and the billing model is dependent on those. That's another type of model that you can select. And then as far as maintaining and versioning your app, uh, customers can opt in to share events with app providers to help you troubleshoot anything that may not be working correctly in your native app. So let's say something is constantly crashing or there's a bug, and folks, end users, consumers here, they can share these logs, these events with you so that you can help maintain your app. And then if you do see something that needs to be fixed and you decide, hey, I need to roll out a fix to this and I'm going to roll out a new version of this, you can use stage rollouts and auto upgrades to publish these new changes to your app. So maybe you're on version 1.0 initially, right? You get some feedback, you incorporate a fix and you want to deploy it, and now you're on version 1.1. Again, you can do this all within Snowflake. And now let's talk about using a Snowflake native app from the consumer's perspective. So if you are browsing the Snowflake marketplace, this is the place where you would discover native apps. So very similar to the experience you have today when you are browsing data sets in the Snowflake marketplace. And again, this is all happening within Snowflake. You don't have to leave Snowflake. If you see a native app that maybe fits your use case very well, you have a data set that you think will, it's going to work really well and run against really well, you can purchase this app on the marketplace. You would use your Snowflake credits, and then you would install the application in that account and run it there. And then from a permissions perspective, this is where you would also grant account level and object level privileges. Maybe there are some objects in that Snowflake account that the app should not be touching. Admins would be able to review the privileges of all these native apps. And last but certainly not least, the data again is not moving. The apps are running in your Snowflake account. This is all happening within a secure environment. Great, so with that overview, let's go ahead and dive into the hands-on lab. And we're going to be following a quick start on quickstarts.snowflake.com. It's called Getting Started with Native Apps. Let's go ahead and dive into it. The first thing we'll do is navigate over to quickstarts.snowflake.com. I have it open in this tab, and search for native apps. You'll see a quick start called Getting Started with Snowflake Apps. Go ahead and click on that. And so this first step here gives you an overview of the Snowflake native app framework, covers a lot of the things that I mentioned in the earlier presentation. But what I want to do is take some time to give you a little more detail on exactly what this Snowflake native application that we're going to be building is going to do. And so this native app is going to be, let's imagine we're going to be using it for inventory and supply chain management. And so you can imagine that we have various suppliers of raw material, and our app is going to look at order data, shipping data, and site recovery data that we have to determine the following. So lead time status, raw material inventory, purchase order status, supplier performance. So before I go any further, let me frame this native app and this quick start a little bit more. And so we're going to be playing the part of both a provider and a consumer. So an app provider, the provider of the native app, and the consumer of the native app. And the reason we're doing this is to give you the perspective of what it's like on both sides, right? To be able to complete this quick start and get that feel for both being a consumer and a provider. And so we're building a Snowflake native application that is going to use consumer data. So the order data, the shipping data, the site recovery data. And so we'll mock a database that has this information, this data. We'll say it's in our database, and then we'll install and run this native app, which we can imagine was provided by some provider in the marketplace. And then we'll have that native app act on the data that is in our Snowflake account. So we're playing both parts here. The native app provider, and we're going to build the native app and create that within Snowflake. And then we're also playing the part of the consumer holding the data that the native app will run on. So that's just to kind of frame what we're going to be doing in this quick start. A few prerequisites. You are going to need a Snowflake trial account. So I've already created one. If you haven't already done so, I recommend you create one. signup.snowflake.com/developers is the link. Now, if once you're creating your Snowflake trial account, one super important note to keep in mind is when you get to the step that asks, what cloud provider do you want to use for your trial account, please make sure that you select AWS. Native Apps is currently only available on AWS, but we are going to be available on the other major cloud providers very soon. But for now, for today, please pick AWS as your cloud provider. So let me close this out and go back. You're also going to need to have some beginner Python knowledge so that you can see, we're going to be writing Python, and you'll see how we update a UDF and how we update a SQL or set up SQL script to expose that UDF, and some Python knowledge here is going to be helpful for you. And you're also going to need a GitHub account, and you're going to need to have a text editor. I'm using VS Code. I just find it really easy to use. But those are the things that you're going to need to be able to follow along. So let's go ahead and jump into step 2. So this step talks more about the architecture and concepts behind Snowflake native apps. I think a lot of this can be summarized really well by this diagram down here. This diagram shows the dynamics between native apps from a provider's perspective and a customer's perspective. And so you can imagine browsing the Snowflake marketplace and encountering, all sorts of native apps. In this diagram, there are 4. And if you're a customer, you can also imagine installing all 4 of those different native apps in one account. And then, if you were to do that, you can imagine all sorts of possibilities here. Maybe these native apps all work on the same data set, but maybe different portions of the data set that you have in your account. Or maybe you have 4 different data sets in your Snowflake account, and each native app operates on one of those data sets. So different sorts of combinations and possibilities here, but this diagram is essentially intended to give you an overview of what these dynamics look like. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to step 3. So step 3, you're going to want to clone this GitHub repo SF guide, getting started with native apps. Here's the command to do it. I've already done it locally on my machine, so I'm not going to show that step on VS Code. But once you clone that, you will have, you'll see this directory structure. And so let's take a look at this directory structure really quickly so you can get a feel for what's included in it. So there are 2 main directories that we will be using as the app provider. So the first one is the source directory. And this is where we're going to be storing all of our various source codes. So our stored procedures, our UDFs, the Streamlit application, and the installation script for the app, so setup.sql. There is also a test folder that has a SQL file that will allow you to test your app locally. And then I mentioned earlier about playing both parts of both the app provider and the consumer. There's this data folder which contains 3 CSV files. We're going to upload the data in these CSV files into corresponding tables into Snowflake, and we'll kind of mock that as the consumer database so that we'll have that data there that the native app can act on and work on. So that's the high level overview of the directory structure. So one thing that I want to focus in on is this manifest.yaml file. And so that's actually this next step, so step 4. And so this manifest.yaml file, extremely important part of all Snowflake native apps. It's going to define several metadata about the app, configuration options, references to different artifacts of the native app. Let's take a look at the one that's here in the GitHub repo. There are a few fields that that I can give you a quick summary on. So there's the manifest version field at the very top. This identifier refers to the version of this actual file. So manifest.yaml, we're saying, hey, this is version 1 of manifest.yaml. This version entry here refers to the version of the native app. And so here you would be saying, hey, this is v1, version 1, and you can leave a comment if you really wanted to write the first version of the application. And then we have a couple of other entries here. So artifacts, which contains options, definitions, where different parts of the package the app package is located, and in particular, the setup script field here, the nested field under artifacts, is required. And so again, this refers to our installation script, which is located. It's going to be located in scripts /setup.sql. A couple of other options here. We also have the configuration entry, which defines what logging we want to use in our application. We're going to want a log level of debug for development of our native app. And then last but definitely not least, the references entry towards the bottom of the file. So this is references to Snowflake objects that the native app is going to need access to, in particular an order table and a site recovery table. And you'll kind of see what that looks like as we start up the app within Snowflake. So let's go ahead and move on to step number 5. Step number 5, so update udf.py. So if you go into VS Code, you'll find the udf.py file in the libraries folder within the source folder of the repo. And so you can see that there are a couple of UDFs that already exist there. So one calculates the distance between 2 points, given that each point has a latitude and longitude, and returns that distance. Another one is calculates the lead time by adding a few different points of data. And also, pro tip, you can import any package that is in this /Snowflake Anaconda channel. But these are just some of the UDFs that already exist that are prepackaged as part of the repo. Let's just to kind of toy around with this udf.py file, let's add a function that just outputs hello world. So let's go ahead and copy this into our udf.py file. So I'll just add this after the cal lead time function. I'll save this. So we can't just write add this function in udf.py and never look at it again. We actually have to be able to expose it to the rest of the app. And the way that we can expose it is by editing the installation script and making sure that the installation script references that function, and also that the application is going to have access to that function. And so the installation script is that setup.sql file that I talked about earlier. This is going to be setup.sql file. It defines all the Snowflake objects that are going to be used within the app. And this script is run every single time that a user installs the application into their environment. And so this is where we're going to expose the hello world Python UDF that we just added to udf.py. So this is, this first code snippet here is just a portion of the file. And what you want is that the second code block at the bottom of step 6, that does exactly what I just mentioned. So let me copy it first, and then I will give you an overview of what it does. So I'm going to go into the setup.sql file, go down to the very bottom. And all we're doing here is creating this function. So just saying, hey, hello world, we're defining it. It's going to return a string. It's written in Python. Here's a runtime version. A few other options that are required for this function to properly execute. And then we're going to make sure that the app that we create is able to use this function. And so that's what this statement down here does. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right, so now that we've exposed hello world in our setup SQL installation script, let's go ahead and move on to step 7. So a lot of the steps moving forward are going to happen in Snowflake, so using Snowsite. And again, we want to put ourselves in the shoes of an app creator, an app provider. And so these steps are going to cover the steps that an app provider would take to be able to actually create the app package in Snowflake and actually be able to have it act on data. So let's go ahead and get into step 7. So step 7, what we're going to do is, actually before we dive into Snowsite, just to give you a quick conceptual overview of what the app package is, you're probably already very familiar with this concept. So if you've ever installed something on your desktop or maybe created an app for a mobile use case, right? So this is essentially the Snowflake equivalent for native apps. And so this app package is going to contain everything that's needed to install the application in a Snowflake account from the consumer perspective. So that includes the setup scripts. And so we've recently modified our project files locally. So that was a udf.py and the installation script. Let's create that Snowflake application package and then start uploading these different files that the native app is going to need. So let's go ahead and go over to Snowsite. On the left, you'll click on apps. Again, if you can't see apps, you can't see apps and packages, you can't see this portion of Snowsite. Again, when you create your trial account, make sure you select AWS. Just a quick reminder. All right, so I'm going to click on apps and then I'm going to click on packages. And we're going to add a new app package. If you go back to step 7 of the quick start, you'll see that the package name that we want to add is called native app quick start package. And then we want to select distribute to accounts in your organization as the distribution option. So I am doing all of this. I'm adding the app package using Snowsite, but if you prefer to use SQL, you can find the equivalent SQL statements in step 7 of the quick start as well. So let me go ahead and add this. Okay, so we've gone ahead and created that package. The next thing that we want to do, so now we are switching gears. So now let's imagine that we are the consumer. And so let's start creating a stage that is going to hold the data. And so all those CSVs that I mentioned earlier, the data in those files, let's create the stage to hold that data. And that is the data that we can kind of mock as a consumer database. And this native app is going to run against that data. It's going to make use of that data, and you'll see the native app working on that data in later steps of the quick start. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, we're putting ourselves in the shoes of a consumer. So if you go back to step 7, you want to create the stage. So copy this SQL statement. I'm going to go back the SQL query and go back into these my native app worksheet that I have here. I'm going to paste that in there. I'm going to run all of this. Great. So I have my stage successfully created. So now what I want to do is begin uploading my files to Snowflake. And I can do all this using the UI. So I'll go back to data. Let me see, refresh this really quickly. Okay, there's native app quick start package, native app quick start schema, stages, and then here we have that native app quick start stage. What we want to do is upload files for our application. And so we're going to be uploading, again, all of the files that are necessary for the app. So that'll be the CSV files. And that's also going to be the libraries, the scripts, the installation scripts for the native app. Let me start with those first because we have to make sure, one really important thing that you do is when you do this, you have to make sure that the directory structure that you create within Snowflake matches the local directory structure on your machine. So let me show you what I mean by this. So for example, if I wanted to go in here and begin uploading we'll go into the source directory. If I wanted to upload this manifest.yaml file, I could just hit open here, right? And if I hit upload, it's going to upload it directly to the stage. But what we need to do is we need to prepend v1 to all the directories that are created in this tutorial so that we can match the local directory structure. And so here in this portion of the modal, all you have to do is say /v1. And what we're telling Snowflake is create this v1 folder and then drop manifest.yaml in there. So let's go ahead and do that. Great. So if we click on v1, you have manifest.yaml. And so now what we need to do is we need to replicate the other 2 folders that exist within v1. So let me show you what I mean by that. Here we have the scripts folder, right? And I'm going to add setup /SQL. If I left this as is, the native app would not function properly. What I need to do is make sure that I add scripts after v1 so that we properly drop the setup.sql file. I shouldn't say drop, I should say add the setup.sql file into this scripts folder within v1. So let's go ahead and upload that. Okay, and so if you click on scripts, you'll see that setup SQL is in there. And then what you're going to want to do is the same thing for the libraries. And so we're going to be uploading all 4 of these files, but again, you want it to match your local directory directory, excuse me. So add libraries here. And if you want to just sanity check yourself, if you click on libraries, you'll see that you have these 4 files in here. Great. So these are the files for the app. So the installation script, the manifest YAML file, the libraries that are required, right? So this is quickly switching back to the provider side. These are this is the steps that a provider would take as they build their native app quick start package, or their native app package, I should say. So let's go ahead and move on to step 8 of the quick start. And so this is what I was mentioning earlier about mocking the consumer database by creating databases and tables that are going to house the data that's held in those 3 CSV files, right? And so we are kind of now putting on the consumer hat and creating the corresponding tables that the native app is going to act on. So what I'll do here is take this entire bit of SQL. I will go back into Snowsite. I'll go back into worksheets and I'll open up my native app worksheet. I like to always delete and just have a clean slate. So I will go ahead and run this. Great. So what the SQL is doing is saying, hey, create this warehouse, create this database and schema, and then define these 3 tables. Here are the columns, here are their types, column types. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the load data functionality within Snowsite to actually populate these tables with the correct data. And so we now have these tables defined. Let's go back and start importing data into those tables. So we'll go to data, databases. Let me go ahead and refresh this. I see the native app quick start database. If I expand that, I'll see the native app quick start schema. And then I have 3 tables here. I'll click on this table and I will load the data that corresponds to this table. So again, we are just quickly creating a database that we can imagine a consumer would have in their Snowflake account, and the native app is going to run against this data. So let's go ahead and start uploading these CSVs. So I will go and click browse, and we'll go into we'll go up one more level, into app, and I'll go into data. And so we can see we want the orders data. So we'll select the order data CSV and hit next. A few options that you have to set before the data is actually loaded into the table. Number 1, select the file format. These are all CSVs. And then once you select that, you'll see several different options. The only one that you have to actually set will be field optionally enclosed by, and you should set that to double quotes. So once you do that, this will be loaded into that table. So 1,000 rows, you can see that was successful. I'm going to do the exact same thing for these 2 other tables. And I can move a little faster here now that you've seen the flow. So shipping data, I'll hit next. We know it's a CSV. Set this field here, double quotes. Done. And then I will do that one more time for the site recovery data. So site recovery data CSV, next, file format CSV, and then one more field to say here, double quotes, next. And now it's done. Great. So let's kind of stop here and recap what we've done. What we did in the previous step was create the app package and upload all of the necessary app files into that app package, into a stage that the app is going to use. That again is, put yourself in the shoes of an app provider. Those are the steps you would take. And then what we just did here now is create a database that has orders, shipping, and site recovery data that the native app is going to act on. And so we just upload all that data into each table here. So let's go ahead and move on to the next step. The next step being creating the app package version. So again, we've created our application package, we've uploaded our project files to the stage, and we've mocked the consumer database with sample data. So let's go ahead and start creating the first version for application package. And so you can do this all again within Snowsite. So let's go back into Snowsite. Let's go back into apps, click on packages. So this is the package that we created earlier. Click on that. And we want to add the first version for it. And so the first version here, let's call it V1. And here you can see that this modal automatically selected native app quick start package and native app quick start stage. So each drop down here, so this first one actually refers to the database. And so this correctly selected native app quick start package is the correct database. And then this second drop down corresponds to the stage, and this correctly selected native app quick start stage. So we're set there. So I just want to give you an overview of what each drop down there was selecting. And then as far as path, we have that V1 directory that we defined in that stage. So, and everything is inside of that folder. So make sure you set it there. And again, I'm doing this using the UI. But there are equivalent SQL statements that you can run to do this if you prefer to use SQL, and they are at the bottom of step 9 in the quick start. But I'm going to stick to the Snowsite UI here. So let me go ahead and click add. Great. And so now you can see that version 1 of this native app quick start package has been created. We're on patch 0. This is the default. We're not going to publish the app package. We're going to go ahead and click done. But you can see some of that information here as well. All right, so we are ready to move on to the next step. So test application. This has a few different statements here that is going to test the application. We're going to run it in a worksheet. So I'll go back to native app. Native app worksheet. Delete that, and I will run all of this. And this is going to test a couple of aspects of the app. Give it a few seconds to run, but it is checking, and it's using the native app quick start package database. It is creating a few different schemas. It's granting usage on different objects within this database, and also granting usage to different objects to the application. And then you'll see here below a test app locally. Again, we're setting our context. We're creating this native app quick start app. And then we, at the very end, show the application packages. So if all this was correctly, successfully executed, you should see here, and we do, this row that says, hey, you have a native app quick start package that was created on this date. Is it the default? Is it the current? And, a few other fields here as well. But this is successful. So let's go ahead and move on to step 11. So step 11 is actually being able to run the app. And so to run the app, now that we have all the data uploaded, both from a provider perspective, all the necessary files, and all the data from a consumer's perspective, that mock database that we have, now that we have that all properly set up along with the app package, we can go ahead and run the app. And so what we'll do is go back into Snowsite, go back into apps, and let me refresh here. Great, so I refreshed, and I do see the native app quick start app installed in this account. And so if I want to run it, I will go ahead and click it. All right, so as you can see, this portion of the app is powered by Streamlit, right? And it is booting up here. And so I mentioned this in the earlier presentation about permissions. And so this app is requesting privileges on this, in this particular case, on the orders table. And I was mentioning that you are able to set the permissions on an object basis for the app. And so, here, if I didn't, if I could deny this access if I wanted to, but in this case, I of course want the app to have access to this data, to this table. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this modal to go ahead and confirm. And so actually it looks like this automatically picked the correct table. So, if I were going to do this manually, I could expand this, go into here, and say, hey, yes, I want you to use the orders table, MFG orders table. Looks like I accidentally unselected it here, so let me reselect it. So done. So there it is. So I'm going to say save. And then also, if you're an admin, you would be able to view permissions across all the native apps installed in an account. So let me go ahead and hit save here. So as you can see, privilege is successfully granted to the native app quick start app. So that was for that table. Asking me again on the site recovery table, I'm not going to mess with this selection modal. I'm just going to hit save because this is correct. And let's see this native app start up, and there you go. So these are the things that we set out to determine earlier using those three CSVs and using the business logic that's defined in that native app. So the lead time status, orders with a lead time status greater than or equal to 60 days, the performance of different suppliers here, and the status of different purchase orders. And so there you have it. This is a native app running in a Snowflake account that you created by creating the app package, uploading all the necessary files, the installation script, the manifest YAML. And this native app is acting on the data that we uploaded, from the consumer side, where we mocked that database and created those three tables and uploaded that data into those tables. So congratulations, you've now developed your first Snowflake native app. So if you're interested in learning more and playing and building more native apps, playing with and building more native apps, please check out the additional docs over at docs.snowflake.com. And then we also have a good chunk of demos that show how to do all sorts of different things with Snowflake over at developers.snowflake.com/demos. Thank you again. My name is Gilberto Hernandez, developer advocate here at Snowflake. I'm very happy that you joined us today at this virtual hands-on lab, and hopefully get to see you at future hands-on labs again. Thank you so much for attending.